starting with this front closest column is a fairly natural and easy choice for trying to establish some proportions that we can then use to reference the rest of the drawing. This is a pretty unusual drawing for me in that I end up drawing it smaller than it is in the reference. I usually try and draw same size, but if anything, I have a tendency to end up with a larger drawing. So part of the, I think, reason for that was I got a bit confused with this entablature just above the columns and didn't actually end up making it as tall as I should have, which then started to shift the proportions of the whole building. But I push on, just starting to become aware of what I'd done probably at about this stage. So I positioned the columns going across by seeking to draw the negative space between them, which I find a fairly accurate way of doing things in a relatively small space, as we have here on the front of this columned veranda porch. What a great upper room to have on a summer's day with a nice breeze to sit and have afternoon tea, eh? This is actually a former post office building in a suburb of Sydney, which is now a cafe. So I'm really just mapping it out. This top section that I've got the pen on now, I didn't make quite wide enough. I actually positioned it more accurately, and then at the last minute I had a bit of a change of heart and thought, oh look, and I just swapped the line, and I think I should have kept it with the original position. So now with this frangipani tree, I establish the edge of it so that I know where I can bring the building up to. Trying to put some tonal values in with my hatching. It is fairly dark up the top here, and it is hard to get an accurate sense of the three-dimensionality of what we're drawing if we don't do any values as we go. And sometimes it simply helps us keep track of what lines are what form, and therefore stops us mistaking one line for another. Now, I put this apex of the roof too high. It wouldn't be too high if I'd had that center section beneath it wide enough, but given that I changed the proportions of that, I should have just dropped it a little bit, the top of the roof, to try and keep the proportions of that central triangle closer to what's in my reference. But never mind. If I ever draw it again, I'll know what to do. And so now I'm establishing just some of these outer lines of our scene and coming back to trying to work out how I'm going to render the detail. And I decide I'm going to indicate the terracotta tiles that are on the roof in some way, because they're a fairly distinctive part of the appearance of this. These terracotta tiles are extremely common in Sydney, so it is nice to represent them. So just trying to plot some of these perhaps less interesting parts, but important if we're to frame the key part of our drawing. And of course we need to get the perspective lines and angles correct. I wasn't real sure what was happening under that corner of the roof on the top left, and because of that I actually wasn't able to hatch it, I think, very successfully. And by the time I then worked out exactly what was happening with the building underneath, it was a bit hard. So it's always good before we do hatching in shadows to really try and work out exactly what's happening in that darkness, exactly where are the walls. And if we have the original reference, and if it's from one of our photos particularly, sometimes by overexposing the photo on our phone app, we can actually see amazing detail in the shadows. So I'm now trying to work out where the shadows are on the front of the building and trying to position those as well as on the columns, and generally start to work on this under the veranda balcony area and get this porch a little more firmed up with the entrance into the building. So just trying to sort my columns out and just how much exactly we can see of the underneath the roof of this porch area, because we can see a smallish amount of it, and it's important that therefore we capture that and distinguish it from the wall that comes straight down underneath, because if we don't, it will affect our perception of the perspective. It won't line up properly with the perspective we've established in other parts of the drawing. So just trying to get something of the door area worked out, and then just this side fence. I've left out the cars because I felt in this case they didn't add anything at all to the scene. Sometimes I think cars are a very helpful addition, but not so. Here I didn't think. These frangipanis have quite distinct leaves. They're not an Australian tree. As far as I know, they're a Pacific Island tree, but they grow very well in Australia. Perhaps they do grow as a native tree in the far north of Australia, but certainly in Sydney they're a very, very popular planting, and they have a lovely fragrance. They're slow growing, but many of them were planted 100 years ago, so there are lots of enormous frangipani trees about. So just trying to work out how I'm going to render this. I do want to keep the frangipani a little bit more stylistically abstract, just as a contrast to the building. And I add some line work to suggest the bricks of the balcony, because bricks and tiles really go together in Sydney and creates quite a different effect from this smooth stonework underneath. And just a hint of the building across the road that's a bit lower down. I've used a 0.3mm pen for most of this, but just for these parts across the road, I've switched to a 0.2mm pen. And I want to keep the details as well as the line work light to suggest a further distance. I don't want this to compete with the columns at all. I want a strong sense of the columns being really quite far in front of everything else. And then just some final tone work and a few more details and strengthening some of the values. I probably could have even gone darker than I have. Just looking at this drawing afterwards, I think I could have done some of the darker values even darker. So I look at this and then I decide that we just need something in the front, and so I put two oblique lines to represent the gutter just in front of the building, which I just think give it enough of a context of the roadway, of the street. So a little more work on the frangipani. Although in some ways it does feel a bit like it comes from a different drawing, but and a little more, just adjusted the angle of the top of the line of the roof there, and there's that bit of gutter, and it's all done. G'day, I'm Stephen Travis. Look, I hope you found this little bit of Sydney architecture pleasant to look at, but interesting to watch how I plotted it, how I drew it. And if you'd like to have a go drawing the old Summerhill post office yourself, then you'll find this reference photo on my channel community page. So why not go there and print off a copy and have a go drawing it? But whatever you draw and however you draw it, make sure you have a good time. I'll see you next time. Bye.